Hello, my name's Martin Kelly. I'm senior editor of Friends Journal, and with me today is Wess Daniels. And Wess is the author of an article this month called Suicide and the Things We Carry. So thanks for coming here, Wess, to talk about the article with us.
Sure. Thanks for having me on.
And it's, normally we don't deal with as personal an issue, so I thank you and all the authors for really sharing here. So obviously this is an article about suicide, so why don't you share a little bit about your story?
Yeah. Let's see. In the article, I tell a little bit of the story of my stepdad, Bernie, and a little bit of what it was like to grow up with him. And shortly before, before I left for California in 2003, I had an experience where we said goodbye to family and to Bernie. And at that point, he and my mom were living separately. And he was, it was pretty clear that he was dealing with some pretty heavy depression and really having a hard time sort of overcoming the separation between my mom and him. They'd been separated for about a year and a half. And I don't know if I don't think I wrote this in the article, but one of the interesting pieces that kind of, for me, sort of symbolized the break in our relationship was really around, he's very into guns, but like not just like into guns like hunting. He was kind of into collecting guns in preparation for kind of the government to come and take them. And he basically offered me to take a handgun with me to California, and this was one of the last times I saw him before I left. He sort of brought this handgun out and it was kind of wrapped up in cloth, and he offered to hand that to me, and I said, and in a minute or in a moment's notice, I thought, okay, I'll take it and I'll sell it, or I'll and he said, the only way that you can have this is if you promise not to sell it. So he read my mind,
you read your mind, yes.
Yeah. So I took it with no intention of ever taking it to California with me, and I gave it to a cousin of mine. But to me, that really uncomfortable sort of distance of like he obviously didn't understand or know what it meant for me to be a Quaker and to kind of be headed in that direction as a young person. And I don't know, to me that just sort of kind of symbolized a little bit of the gap between us, and moving to California because of his depression and that sort of thing. It was hard to keep calling home and checking in on him, because of every conversation, it just felt like going down sort of this dark spiral staircase every time I would talk to him. I just think that was a symptom of kind of deeper issues that he was struggling with. And then I moved, my wife Emily and I moved to LA in 2003, August of 2003, and it was Thanksgiving, the week before Thanksgiving, that he committed suicide. And it was definitely a shock. It was a great surprise. It was devastating. I have 5 younger siblings. I'm the oldest on my mom and stepdad's side of the family, and I have 5 younger siblings, and I had a couple of siblings who were still living at home. So it was a shock from that perspective. It was it was something that I think we also saw coming, because he refused to get help. He refused to see that he needed help from a depression standpoint, but I think more than that, a lot of the other things that were going on in his life. And he had made a number of threats over the last year or so about it. So yeah, that's, and that was 10 years ago that happened. And I don't know, I guess I coped with it initially. Emily and I came back home to Ohio and, did the funeral and everything. And I coped with it by going to therapy for about a year and kind of working it out that way. but then later on, and kind of the point of the article is that later on you realize that it's still there, that you really haven't you kind of dealt with like part of it, but the healing hasn't progressed. So
Right, and you talk about the things that you carry, and you have a quote about how we have these weights that are with us whether we know them or not, invisible weights that we carry. So
yeah,
when did you how did you sort of realize that you still had sort of unfinished business, this weight that you were carrying?
yeah. When I it was like last spring, a year ago, last spring, that it sort of I realized that there was this weight, this intangible weight that I was lugging around with me, and it's certainly the case that I'd thought a lot about Bernie over the last 10 years, and had when my family and I would get together, sometimes we would sort of like tiptoe into the area of telling stories about Bernie, but usually those are things that we didn't really get into very much. We'd remember him on his birthday and on the day he died and those sorts of things. Like, but not. I mean, actually, there'd be years that would go by and I'd think, oh, yesterday was Bernie's birthday. That sort of thing. But last year in the spring, I was at we did this thing called God Pub that would meet once a month, and that particular God Pub was around death and dying, and we started getting into sharing stories. And I realized that anytime I wanted to share a story about Bernie, it was negative. I always tried to kind of spin. I only really focused on the bad stories and the bad experiences of his life, and it was kind of during that God Pub that I realized that I was doing that and that I didn't have to do that. That there are other stories that I could tell, and that there was another version of his life that I had almost sort of suffocated in. I think just as a way of coping, like a way of trying to make sense of his suicide, was to really like get back at him. Was to kind of like tell the bad stories.
Right. So it was this unconscious revenge then, or guilt or anger coming out?
Yeah, probably some, anger, just unfinished business. Obviously didn't really realize that that's what I was doing, or even just that had that kind of control over me. And so when I realized that there are other stories I haven't told, or I kind of lost touch with, and there's a lot of things about him that I like, even though he was a very difficult individual to be around in some other ways. And I realized that I didn't have. I got to choose, or I get to choose which of those stories to tell. That created some space for me, and opened up kind of a place where I could kind of move towards healing. And for me, the process then, and kind of like how the article for Friend Journal came to be, was that I was actually asked to write a chapter for a book on fatherhood earlier last summer. And I thought, I don't have anything to say about fatherhood. What on earth would I write? And as I sat with it, I realized I don't really feel like I have something to tell people about what it means to be a father, but I have a story of fatherhood, and it was around Bernie. And so writing that chapter, kind of after coming to this realization of kind of the way that I had been holding these memories of him, kind of holding them captive, that really provided the space for me to do the work I needed to do to let go of some of that. And as a part of like getting back into writing, as a part of like writing about his story for the first time, it's the first time I'd ever really tried to write about it, I started listening to Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, which is like his favorite.
Like that, okay.
And I like have one of my favorite memories of him is listening to Pink Floyd, and we'd sit out in the backyard, and he'd turn his big speakers out into the windows, so they're blaring out in the backyard, and he'd sit around the fireplace, and he'd just play air guitar and like all the lead, I mean, it was just like, as a kid growing up, it was cool, and so I started listening to Pink Floyd, to kind of to bring those memories back. And it was amazing, the sort of like the response, the memory response attached to music that way. So that helped. So I actually, for the chapter of this other book, all the subsections are names of songs from Dark Side of the Moon, and then like little quotes and stuff like that. So, anyways,
Yeah, well, that's a nice memory that you're bringing back.
yeah.
Great. Well, thanks. Well, that's about all the time we have here for these little video chats we have. And of course, folks can read Wes's article in Friends Journal, the current issue, May, on mental health and wellness. And this is one of the articles we put on for free. And I think we also have you reading the article, so you can hear Wes reading it to you directly.
Sure.
So thank you for doing that. And
Thanks,
thank you for being here. Again,
Yes.
you can find us all, friendsjournal.org. Bye, Wes.
Bye.